Before she died, my mother dispensed audiums with the mechanical consistency of a gumball machine. She offered them like pieces of still wisdom. Their minimal flavor quickly faded, even so I found myself savoring them. I didn't want to relinquish the last sentiments she had to give me. Watched pots never boil, Mary. Two birds, one stone. Honey catches more flies than vinegar. At first, it was easy to pretend that the audiums were relevant to our conversations, but as she lost lucidity, they melded together and became unintelligible. Throw the baby out with the gift horse. It's time to buy the elephant in the room, Mary. I used to sit next to her in the nursing home and will myself to understand. Her tone was always urgent, her grasp fervent. She looked at me like she was begging me to comprehend nonsense. But even then, I suppose I knew what she was really telling me without voicing it. Words that I would not bear to hear even if she were capable of saying them. She was dying. Her jumbled audium seemed to be all that remained of a once expansive vocabulary. She used to weave stories with a language like a beautiful thread and her tongue as a needle, but it was as if she forgot how to sew. I imagined her dementia burrowing into her brain, chiseling out words, leaving only rot in its wake. When her disease first manifested, I deluded myself. I became convinced I could slow her decline with the right materials. I brought her daily newspapers until the incident happened. That day I gave her the daily paper and a quick kiss on the cheek. I sank down in the stiff armchair at her bedside and shielded my eyes from the sunlight that streamed in from the window. I glanced at her veinous hands and saw them tremble. The paper shook with her convulsions. I felt every muscle in my body tense as she emitted a low, warbling moan. "Mom, what is it?" I asked. But her only response was to curl further in on herself. She clutched her ancient nightgown to her chest like a small child. My heart clenched, terrified and confused. I reached out to comfort her, take the paper away, but she broke down sobbing. "Don't cry over book covers," she whispered. When I finally wrestled the tear-sodden paper away from her, I read the headline. Jenkins twins suspected to be sixth and seventh victims of backward butchers. After that, I only brought Debbie Macumber novels, but the damage was done. She stopped reading not long after the newspaper incident. I watched the seasons change from her room's window as the trees shed their leaves. Resplendent shades of crisp golds and browns were carried away by the wind. As far as the eye could see, the trees' skeleton limbs were left to brace the cold. Without their armor, they looked defenseless and alone. My mother lost herself in much the same way. Day by day, the color bled from her life, her essence shed from her skin like so many dead leaves. In its absence, she was carved bare until only a dull, unrecognizable hole remained. I tried to search her face for any semblance or selfhood, for her skeleton leered as if mortality were staking its claim. Flesh clung to her jaw and hung in jewels like the last vestiges of life. flung on her frame. She was my mother, and she was death incarnated. I found that I could not look at her for long. I stared hard at the floor in my hands, the door, anywhere but the unfamiliar gaze from the socket sunken in my mother's face. When she sensed that my glaze had shamefully slid away, she sometimes snarled at me. Watched pots never boil. Her frail fingers would dig into my wrist and leave imprints in my skin. I could feel her urging me to look at her, to see her deceased eyes and wispy hair and polar skin. This is my confession, so I can admit it was hard to visit her in the end. I found excuses to leave as early as I could, or better yet, to never come. I hated the twisted, repetitive autumns that she upheaved like a sickness. I hated the bleach smell of the nursing home. Most of all, I hated sitting next to her as an unseen but firm force took more and more of her away. I knew she was dying. For months, I could see it etched in her face and hear in the absence of things she couldn't say. But then why was I left so bereft when death came like a thief in the night? I should have been relieved for her suffering to end, but all I could hear were the last words she said as they bounced around in my head. Mary, she uttered, 2 days before her end. Better late than never. I didn't hear her speak again until long after she was dead. Her funeral came and went with little fanfare. A few of my friends came from work. Most of hers were already dead. Together we listened as the pastor we had never met described the caring creator we had never perceived. When the time came, I sprinkled dirt on her casket and watched as the gaping maw of the earth swallowed her whole. Afterward, Ethan, Jade, Ellison, Sam, and Nick and I all crowded around a small bonfire as February's cold sank teeth in our skin. I drank more than I spoke. My friends carried the conversation. When it was time for the rest to leave, Ethan didn't. I sank into his arms that night, and every night since. 1 week passed without my mother's audience, then 2, then 3. Several months came and went. When it rained, it was a pet-free downpour. I judged books by their covers and stared at pots just long enough for them to boil. I don't know why. I just know that I felt her absence acutely. So much so that the lack of her became its own presence. My mother met an end she didn't deserve, and I couldn't find the justice in it. How was it fair for her to die alone in a nursing home, left with nothing but a few sentences she could string together, wilted flowers, and a book she could no longer read? Horribly, unforgivably. How was it fair that she became a burden to me, and I resented her for it? I hated sitting there, listening to her half of conversations decades in the past, a prisoner of her own mind, only ever lucid enough to hate me. Sometimes the grief rose and fell in crescents and waves, and other times the anger ignited me. When I was angry, I would go home and set a full pot on the hot burner and wait, just like I used to sit and wait at the nursing home for her to say anything, do anything. I was good at passive participation. I sat and watched as time elapsed and bled the life from her eyes and the love from her heart. So I did it, too, with the pots. I wish I could say I watched the water boil because I missed her, but I think the truth is that I was daring her, my own vengeful version of "Look, Mom, no hands," a desperate, illogical call for her attention. But in all the times I called for her across the deathless void, I never actually expected her to answer. Until she did. I first heard her words from Ethan's lips after the fire. I guess I left the burner on for too long and so often that by being careless, maybe I forgot to turn it off one night after I emptied the pot of boiling water. All I know is that my house went up in flames and little was left, save for ashes. After I lost everything, I was so relieved when Ethan invited me to stay with him. Of course, I said yes. He had a calming and charming bungalow out in the country on land his grandfather left him. Our casual fling quickly became a serious relationship. He brewed tea almost every night, and always prepared mine with plenty of honey. As my mother would say, living with Edith was a silver lining. But that's how it felt until she decided to join us. 2 weeks ago, my mother spoke to me, but I didn't know it at the time. As Ethan set my mug down on the coffee table, I looked into his deep blue eyes. "Thank you," I said. "Hey, do you mind grabbing a blanket?" "Sure thing, love." He brushed the curl behind my ear and walked to the doorway before suddenly turning back. He stood there in the doorway for a few minutes, unmoving as if in a trance. I felt his eyes on me and raised mine only to meet his vacant stare. He was looking through me. His brow was furrowed. "I thought I told you watched pots never boil." The voice that left his lips were not his, nor was it hers. Not really. It was something else. Inhuman. A death rattle wheeze that formed the shape of words and absent of inflection. I did not hear it so much as I felt it, a chill that twirled around my spine and tightened. I felt this entity and instantly became clammy and nauseous. I could not speak. My mouth was filled with ashes. "Honey, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Ethan came out of it, crouched before me, and gently reached for my hands. Finally, my throat unclogged and words spilled out. "What do you mean? Why did you say watched pots never boil?" I said. I searched his gaze, but only saw our shared confusion. "I didn't say anything. Are you sure you're feeling okay?" He inspected me with concern. I both believed him and didn't. I knew that those words couldn't be his. But then why did they leave his lips? At first, nothing came of it. I wish I could say that this was the end of it, but it was only the beginning. That voice. I heard that voice more times than I care to admit. The words were always my mother's, but the voice was not of this earth. It was devoid of humanity. It lacked light, love, or even warmth. At first, I believed that my mother was speaking to me across the great distance, and maybe the bone-chilling voice was interference. Other times, I was convinced that Ethan was pranking me. It was easier and safer to think that my boyfriend was an asshole than it was to think we were being haunted by my mother. But even then, I could not shake my terror. Every day, just as defenses lowered, that nauseating voice would surface from the grave of his lips, impermanent there. Hours ago, it said, "Two birds, one stone. Two birds, one stone," over and over again. It was a chant, and it was a condemnation. I could not hear the anger, but I could feel it suffocating the words and contaminating our home. Ethan, what the fuck is going on with you? I pushed him in the chest and was shocked as his head cracked back against the wall. It was like his body went lax, like his form was hollow and the voice was in absence. Let her off the hook. The words were carried by a rapid hiss between his cracked lips. I shuddered as the temperature plummeted. Ooh, I choked. I could feel the shift as Ethan returned to his senses. He rubbed his head. Mary, what happened? Why are you looking at me like that? Ethan, I can't. This isn't funny. You need to stop. I pleaded. Mary, I don't know what you're talking about. My head is pounding. I'm just gonna go lay down for a minute, okay? Flabbergasted, I watched as he walked away and shook off the urge to beg him to stay with me. I wanted, no, I needed to get to the bottom of that voice. If my boyfriend had this shitty sense of humor, then okay, but we would talk about this like adults. Things had gone too far. So I went in search of Tylenol for his headache. Like my mother always said, you catch more flies with honey than vinegar. I searched high and low in the cabinets and drawers and turned up empty. It seemed like I found everything but Tylenol. I was almost ready to give up, but then I remembered his guest bathroom cabinet. I felt around inside the drawer when my fingers brushed across two thin metal chains. I pulled them out and held them up to the light. They were curious things, two thin strands, each with a single bird charm dangling. They looked familiar in a way. I just couldn't place it. Did Ethan have family stay in this room? His mom or sisters? As I studied them, my heart began to race. Two birds, one stone. Surely that was a coincidence. I wanted to put them back in the drawer, close it and forget about it, but even as I thought it, I felt a compulsion to keep them. Some unknown instinct was nudging me, almost almost like it wasn't myself. The necklaces looked so innocent. They reminded me of high school graduation gifts. I didn't believe they were particularly expensive, but I could tell they were treasured. The birds were smudged with blurred fingerprints as if they had been rubbed continuously. With sudden clarity, I knew where I'd seen them before. Of almost its own volition, I felt my hand reach for my phone in my pocket. I pulled it out, unlocked it, and stared at my home screen. Unblinking, I typed into the Google bar. Jenkins twins disappeared. My heart sank. The girls were gone, but their necklaces were still here. It couldn't be, couldn't it? The necklaces were a perfect match to the ones the girls wore in the article's picture. Why else would Ethan have two identical necklaces in here? Frantically, I googled backwoods butcher. There had been two additional suspected victims since the day I gave my mother that paper. My mind raced as I searched for Ethan's alibis and came up empty. I wanted to scream. I wanted to call the police, but I needed to think. Honey, where are you? Ethan called from the hallway. I panicked and put the necklaces back in the drawer before closing it quietly. I was desperate to confront him, but my mother's words rang in my head. Let her off the hook. I thought about all the things she had said, before and after she was dead. That whole time I thought she was stuck in conversations in the past, but what if she somehow knew about the future? Watched pots never boil. What if she knew about the fire? If I paid more attention to the burner, then the fire would never happen. Two birds, one stone. I thought about the necklaces as nausea crept up my throat. Let her off the hook. My pulse raced. What does it mean? Is it literal? Who is she? And more importantly, where is she? Should I follow him to find out?